Welcome back to the online audience, and as we have about a minute to go until we get started with our next session, we want to welcome you. You can, again, provide comments and questions in the online content. We'll interact with you as we continue our sessions this afternoon with Greg Koukl of Stand to Right Ministries. Stand to Reason. I'm sorry. My team here in the booth is a lot of help right now. We're really good, and so we're looking excited to what the afternoon has for us. Again, let us remind you that tomorrow morning, Greg will again be speaking at Waterbrook. Tomorrow on the topic is Jesus, the Only Way. And we would love to have you join us for that. It will be available online, live at 9:30 with our 9:30 service, and then also available at 11 o'clock. So we're really excited that you are here, and it's our pleasure to have you here. It's time for us to head back live to the Waterbrook Bible Fellowship campus and to our afternoon sessions with Greg Koukl. We begin with an introduction from worship and missions pastor Don Moore.
Okay, good afternoon. We're glad you're here. Some of you are in different seats, like we're getting spitted on this seat. No, it's good. We're glad. It's good stuff. If you're watching online, maybe Jeff already covered this. We're glad you're back with us online. And Jeff, our lead pastor, is going to be, if you want questions at any time while Greg is speaking, you can put questions in or comments, and Jeff will try to respond to that. So feel free to do that. And everybody can shut off their phones. All right, I'm teasing. So we're just grateful again for Greg being here. And so come on ahead and do this afternoon sessions.
Okay, I got it. I just flipped the button. Thank you. I was thinking about some of the crazy events this last year because of COVID. It reminded me this applause. I got flown all the way out to Chicago to speak in a big auditorium to nobody except for some other speakers and a big film crew. Now, there were like 2,000 or 3,000 people in the audience, but they're all digital. But I had to tell the people before I went on the air, I said, don't laugh at anything that's funny, because there's nobody in this audience, and all you hear is one or two people laughing. And then it's going to sound like only a couple of bozos thought it was funny, and the whole audience did. Because you can't see the audience, you can just see me up here on the stage. But we are talking about Tactical Game Plan. The book for that is, this is actually the 10th anniversary edition. The red thing in the top there lets you know that it's revised and expanded like 35% or so from the original book that was out in 2009. I've doubled the number of tactics, too, in the book. So if you have the old one, I'm glad, but you need the new one, all right, because you're going to get a lot more that will help you a lot. I also have mentioned this book called The Story of Reality, how the world began, how it ends, and everything important that happens in between. And this was my, I always feel uncomfortable saying this, but it's the truth. I mean, it's my humble attempt at providing a mere Christianity for a new generation, okay? There's only one C.S. Lewis, there's only one Mere Christianity, but a lot of people won't read it because they think it's too hard, which drives me batty, because I think he's one of the most accessible writers on the planet, or was, and all his books are still right up at the top at Amazon. But what I try to do is take a basic picture of reality, the Christian worldview, and start from the beginning and go to the end and kind of help people to see it with soft apologetics kind of worked in between. Very conversational, very easy read, and it's the kind of thing you can give to a non-Christian, and you will not be embarrassed, all right? Because just like Mere Christianity, it's very accessible to non-Christians. You're not going to get a lot of Christian lingo, no condescension, nothing embarrassing. It's just a careful and clear characterization of the truth, and portions where I'm answering challenges that's built into the text, the best way I can put it. So I just want to commend that to you. You may find that this is useful for you. What we've been doing here is we've been exploring a bit a different way of engaging people for Christ, a way that I think is going to be, and has been in my own experience, and the experience of many others that have reflected back to me, much more effective than maybe a tradition that we have received from our recent forebears, like the Jesus movement, or maybe even before that, but one that I think is not well suited to our culture right now. And that is an approach that emphasizes harvesting as opposed to gardening. And like I said earlier this morning, unless you, there's not going to be a harvest unless you have a season of gardening, okay? It's axiomatic. It's obvious. It's not even profound. It's so simple and true. But it is central to the whole approach of expanding the kingdom and making a difference for the cause of Christ. And what I've offered to you is a way of thinking about it so that gives you a different focus, gardening, one that you are probably better suited for than most people are for harvesting. And I'm convinced, not just from experience, but also from the biblical record, that the harvest pretty much takes care of itself if the gardening is done well. And so I'm inviting you to consider yourselves as gardeners and to do gardening, but I've got a tool that will help you to do that, and that is the tactical game plan, which has 3 different parts, and we've actually only talked about the first part of the game plan. Just the first part. It is very simple. All you're doing is gathering information. So if what you start out doing to initiate the game plan is simply to gather information from the people with whom you want to engage, then you are not putting yourself at risk at all. You are being a student of their views. There is no grounds upon which they can attack you. Now, they may make presumptions about your views and go after you based on that. So there is some vulnerability, but there are ways to parry that. I mean, one way is to say, well, you know what? I don't really want to talk about my own views right now. I'm interested in your view. Is that okay with you? Now, some of you might think, I never heard any preacher say that was okay to do. But remember, I'm suggesting that you get into the shallow end of the pool. Because for many of you, that's the only way you're going to get wet. If I make you dump in the deep end, you're not going there. You're going to sit out here and get a tan, right? And so I'm trying to help you to see how accessible this is, no matter who you are, how young you are, or how old you are. And I did the young because there's a young lady here, the darling little gal that's here, but I'm not pointing to the person how old you are. Notice how I didn't do that. I just did a general look at the audience. I want you to be able to be useful for the cause of Christ right out of the gate, doing something simple. And as you move forward with the game plan, and I'll explain more in just a moment, you will be more effective, okay? And that it's entirely legitimate to deflect challenges if what you are at that point in time is just in an information gathering mode. It's okay, all right? Eventually, you want to learn to give an answer for the hope that's within you, but that's a learning process. Okay, and it's good if you have a tactical game plan to give you protection until you learn some of those things. Now, in both of the books, Story of Reality and the Tactics, you're going to get a lot of substance about how to answer those questions because they're built in to the narrative of the Story of Reality. They're also built into the illustrations in Tactics. But with regard to Tactics, I want you to get the game plan proper and see how it then expands to the particular circumstances that you face, all right? So our first step of our game plan was to, what are we doing? Gathering information. That's all we're worried about. We're not looking down the line. We don't know where it's going to go. Might not go anywhere. We're just getting a lay of the land. We want to be a student of other people's point of view. We have a model question, and the model question is, what do you mean by that, or some version of that, okay? We might draw personal information out from them. We might draw information about their spiritual views, okay? And especially when people are on the attack, so to speak, they're coming after details of the Christian worldview. They're finding fault with our view. That's especially when this first question is really valuable, because what it does is deflects the attack for the moment, and it gives you an opportunity to get more information. So you pitch the ball back into their court. All right, so you're not on the hook. You pitch it back. You tell me more. Okay, it gives you some time to think. Pardon me, if you need it. And it also gives them more time to explain their view so you get a clearer picture. But in explaining their view, if they're able to, and if they're not, by the way, that puts them in an awkward position, but that's a good thing. And it's also true for us. If somebody asks, what do you mean by that, Christian, and we're not able to articulate it more clearly, well, shame on us. We should understand our own view adequately enough to put it in other words. This is why I really encourage you, watch your language, stay away from all of that religious stuff, find synonyms that will allow you to do the job. And I have a chapter, it's a mini tactic in the book that explains a bit about that. If they can't articulate their own view, maybe it's not a good view. Maybe it's not well thought through, and that gets them thinking about their view. But also, if they are able to articulate it, what they generally do is reveal more ambiguities that need more clarification. And so you can keep probing with that question, showing an interest in them and in their view, and letting them talk. If they're talking, you're not, no pressure on you. Shallow end of the pool. Then you can decide where to go next. That brings us to the second step of the game plan. The first step is to gather information. The second step of the game plan is called reversing the burden of proof. Reversing the burden of proof. Now, you might have heard this term before, burden of proof, and I want to tell you what it means. The burden of proof is the responsibility someone in the conversation has to give reasons for a view, proof, if you will. Somebody bears that burden. Okay, now here's the key part. Who is it in any conversation that bears the burden of proof? And the answer is this. Write this down. The person who makes the claim bears the burden. The person who makes the claim bears the burden of proof. So if you say that something is so, and it's controversial, you have an obligation to give some reasons why you think it's so. All kinds of claims that are being made in a political season like the one we are just kind of coming out of. They're monstrous claims on both sides of the aisle. If you're going to make a monstrous claim about something or someone, you have to give the reasons why you think your claim is true and why anybody else should take the claim seriously. Now, we're not going to go into kind of critical thinking ideas and how we know whether it's a good justification or not. That's a different discussion. Although some of the other tactics that you read later in the book will really equip you well in your basic critical thinking skills. And the first rule of critical thinking is to get a clear fix on the idea that you want to think about. And that's the first step of the game plan, right? What do you mean by that? You don't want to misrepresent somebody else's view. That's called a straw man. It's bad manners and it's bad thinking. In other words, you erect a straw man that you knock, like a scarecrow, that you knock over easily. It's not what the other person believes. It's a distortion of what they believe that is vulnerable to attack, but now you're beating up on an argument or a point of view that the other person doesn't hold. Okay, this happens all the time in our culture, and as a lot of the attacks against Christianity are like that as well. And this, by the way, I mentioned red pen logic. Did anybody go to red pen logic while they were having lunch? I don't know if you did. Well, you're going to learn a lot of these flaws in people's challenges in Christianity in these little 5 or 6 minute segments because we talk about them. It's a great way to get a quick tutorial on them. So the rule is the person who makes the claim bears the burden. Okay? Let me tell you why this is so important in our discussions with other people. Because oftentimes it's the other person that is making a charge against Christianity or stating a point of view that is opposite from the Christian point of view. Like the statement, everything's relative. That is an attempt to delegitimize the Christian view, which claims to be objectively true, and dismiss it as just your own personal belief system that isn't related to the rest of the reality, okay? It's just relativizing it, okay? Well, fine. Now I understand in asking those questions, but I have another step. I am going to want them to give me the reasons why they think their claim is true. Since they're making a claim contrary to Christianity, they bear a burden to give evidence, okay? Now, if we don't do this, if we don't shift the burden of proof back to the person who's making the claim against us, and we take the responsibility on ourselves to disprove the claim that they've offered us, we are giving them a free ride. They can do anything they want. They can say anything they want, and they get away with it. All the responsibility is on us to disprove them. And that's the way they view it, which is why they launch this back at us, and then we're stuck. I don't know how to answer that. I don't know. I didn't read the book. I didn't watch the video. I didn't see the red pen logic. Oh, I'm stuck. No, you're not. It's not your job to disprove their claim. It is their job to prove it. No more free rides. All right? They have thrown the gauntlet down. What's a gauntlet? What's a gauntlet? Yeah, it's a glove. It's like a medieval glove. What does it signify when you throw the gauntlet down? Yeah, you're ready. It's a challenge, right? So the knight doesn't throw the gauntlet down and say, I win. The other guy say, wait a minute, you just got in the game. Now you got to show us what you got. You got to put up or shut up, right? You don't get a free ride. Another 60s alert. In the immortal words of Ricky Ricardo, they got a lot of splaining to do. And so we want to make them do the splaining. And some of you are thinking, who's Ricky Ricardo? Lucy, you cannot be on the show, that guy. And so what we want to do is when they make the claim, we don't want to give them a free ride. We don't take the responsibility for refuting them on ourselves. We want to put the burden of proof back on them. And I'm going to give you an example of how that happened in my life. I was on a radio program in Los Angeles, KFI, which you can actually get KFI here in Texas at nighttime. It's a 60,000-watt hammer that goes all the way to the Mississippi River when the rest of the local stations go clear, okay? And so this is a shock jock station in the Los Angeles area. All the radical guys are on that. So I had an opportunity to be on a show on one Sunday night and making the case for intelligent design against materialistic explanations. And during the response time, people would call in and have at me. Somebody raised the issue of Big Bang cosmology. Now, I know this is controversial in Christian circles, but Big Bang cosmology does not bother me in the slightest bit because it fits so well with our worldview. Because it seems to me, you know, a Big Bang needs a Big Banger, right? And our story starts in the beginning, bang. It dovetails nicely. Now, if you're a young earther, that doesn't work so well, and I appreciate the concern there. But in this particular case, this guy was trying to inveigh with Big Bang cosmology against my view of a creator. And I'm trying to tell him, I said, wait a minute, Big Bang's on my side, it's not on your side, right? So he's going to now explain to me how you can get a Big Bang without a Big Banger, all right? And here's what he says, because I listened to the recording afterwards and I wrote it all down. He says, well, I don't think it is. In other words, it's not an argument for your side. Because you could start with a base of nothing, and you could say that there was nothing but an infinite, continuous moment, and eventually one tiny little insignificant thing happened, a point happened in the nothingness. Let me just pause for a moment. Well, that's the problem. How do you get a point in the nothingness? That's precisely the problem. So notice how what he's doing is sidestepping the entire issue. You start with a base of nothing, whatever that means, because nothing's not a base. This is why I think it's good if Christians are talking about God creating from nothing, or the universe from nothing, or you should say no thing. Because people start treating nothing as if it's something, and the something it is nothing. That's why if you say, well, the universe came from no thing, that means there was nothing, no thing there before, and all of a sudden, something. In this case, that something was just a point, which is very simple. It's very small. How can it be small? There's nothing else there to compare it to. Anyway, eventually one tiny, little insignificant, the point happened in the nothingness. It just happened. Okay, so give me that. The point happened. Well, that's the whole issue. I continue. Then the point expanded, which is extremely simple, he said. Well, it's simple to understand your terms, but how does the point expand? What is expanding it? What is it expanding into? Anyway, so he just says this. It requires no intelligence. So no intelligent God had to intervene. Okay. All we need is a little tiny imperfection in the perfect nothingness. Notice how he's using adjectives to describe nothing. You can't have an adjective. It can't be a large nothing. It can't be a small nothing. It can't be a perfect nothing or an imperfect nothing. It is just no thing. Okay, so this just shows how confused this is. Again, I am taking liberties here, but this is pretty silly. Now, I didn't do any of this on the air. I'm just listening. All we need is a little tiny imperfection in the perfect nothing. That imperfection expanded, became variegated, and increasingly complex, and soon you had galaxies and planets spinning out. So apparently, in his view, you start with nothing, which is kind of a placid thing, and then a speck of something comes into the base of nothing, and it really annoys the nothing, and so it starts getting agitated and spewing out planets and galaxies, and it's perfectly understandable. So after he was done, I said, and this is now an application of the second step of the Columbo tactic. I said, it's interesting how you started. You started by saying, you could say that. You could say that. I wrote it down when I was here. I said, you know what? You're right. You can say anything you want. But giving us reasons to believe that's what actually took place, that's another matter, and you haven't done that at all. So I have nothing to respond to here. People tell stories all the time. And sometimes they're interesting, and they're complex, and they seem like overwhelming, and they even sound compelling. But they're just stories unless there are reasons given to support that the stories represent fact. Now, here's a tell when one of these stories, which I call bedtime stories because they're meant to put your point of view to bed. Night-night. Here's a tell, an indicator, a giveaway that one of these stories is coming. I can explain that. Okay, that's the phrase people will use. They'll say, oh, I can explain that. Oh, I can explain that. Okay, good. I'm all ears. What do you mean by that? Explain it. But notice what they say is, I can explain that. They aren't saying, and here is the evidence why my explanation is a good one. All they're doing is giving an alternate explanation. And an alternate explanation is not a refutation of the earlier point. It's just another story. It's the gauntlet that's thrown down into the arena. Now you're in play. Now you need more reasons why your explanation is better than mine. Okay? Dan Brown does this in what was the name of that book? The what? Da Vinci Code. There you go. As an excellent example, it's probably 10, 12 years ago since this book came out. The Da Vinci Code, where he describes, or the character in there describes about how Jesus was made from a mere mortal into the Son of Man at the Council of Nicaea, to the Son of God at the Council of Nicaea. And he's got all this information that sounds so persuasive because he says it's fact. Now, none of it is fact. We know what happened at the Council of Nicaea. We got the records. I got a copy of it in my home, Creeds of Christendom by Philip Schaff. It's all there. We know who was there, how many people were there, and how they voted. And where Dan Brown says it was a close vote, whether Jesus was God or not, yeah, it was close, 416 to 2. And the two dissenters were the Egyptians. Okay, so anyway, but when they tell the stories, like Dan Brown does, and other people picked up on this as if it's fact, they sound good and they sound persuasive. Okay, so it's fine. Let them tell the story. Let them give their alternate point of view. We're not going to shut down the discussion. We want to hear what they have to say. But we have another question, and this is the second question that's part of the game plan that is used with regards to the second step. And that is this. Now, how did you come to that conclusion? Or some variation. Now, how did you come to that conclusion? Or what are your reasons that you think that is the accurate representation? Now, I think Dan Brown is wrong on the way he characterizes the Council of Nicaea. Now, if the other person says he's right, then I'm going to ask him, how do you know? Well, I read it in Dan Brown's book. Well, how do you know it's right? Because in the foreword, he says it's a fact. That's part of the fiction. That's all part of Dan Brown's fiction. The book, Da Vinci Code, is in the fiction section of the library, of the bookstore. It's not, it's a novel. Just because he says it's fact doesn't mean it is fact. I know it's not fact. How do you know? Because I read the primary source documentation on the Council of Nicaea. That's how I know that he's wrong. Go back to the primary source documents. They'll tell you it's not a secret. It isn't hidden in an archive somewhere and Koukl's got the key. It's public knowledge. So when somebody advances a point of view, you don't want to take the responsibility on yourself to refute the point of view. You want to ask them what their reasons are. And not until, which by the way is the second step of critical thinking. First, you get an idea of what the issue is, and second, the reasons why someone might think that that is a true statement, what they're advancing. And not until you have the reasons are you really in a good place to assess it. Now, sometimes you can assess a point of view because the point of view is obviously false. It's obviously flawed when you reflect on it, okay? So I was at Ohio State University, and I had lectured on the problem of evil, and I was in the student lounge, and there was a student I was having a conversation with, and he was telling me some variation of the Dan Brown thing, that the Council of Nicaea changed the Bible. So all kinds of nefarious things apparently happened in 325 AD at the Council of Nicaea. But notice it's 325. It's 400 years. Am I missing a century? From 25 to 125 to 225 to 325. 125, 225. Yeah, 300 years. Is that right? Yeah. In any event, it's a long time. They changed the Bible, okay? This is what he's telling me. And now that's not possible. What do you mean it's not possible? I know it's not possible. How can you say it's not possible? It says, see that newspaper right there? What's that? That's the Lantern. That's the Ohio State University newspaper. See, it's published and this is today's edition, right? It was sitting right there on the counter. And it's been distributed all over the place, right? What if I wanted to change some significant portion of today's Lantern? Today's Lantern. How would I do that? I'd have to get all the copies that have been distributed and replace them with my copies that have my changes. Do you realize how hard that would be for just the Lantern from that day on the campus of Ohio State University? It's a gargantuan task. And you want me to believe that 300 years after the New Testament documents have been circulating in written copies all over the Mediterranean, that Constantine figured out a way to get them all back, change them, and send them out again? Please. See the problem? I mean, this is false on its face. But most people haven't thought about that issue, okay? That particular illustration I actually have in the tactics book. But the point there is sometimes you can see by the nature of the thing being discussed that some options are not even on the table, if you think about them. But most people have not thought about them. They're letting Dan Brown do their thinking for them, or people like him, they're reading stuff and then they're just repeating it. So when you ask your second Columbo question, after you've gotten clear on their view, and then you've asked them, how did you come to that conclusion? What are your reasons for that? Do not be surprised if you hear, guess who? Simon and Garfunkel again. The sounds of silence. Because your question generously presumes that they came to a conclusion, which is not the case for most people. And by the way, this is also both sides of the aisle. Christians too, they are vulnerable to being socialized. Fortunately, I think for the most part, Christians are socialized to the truth, but I believe it's true not because I'm socialized that way, because I've independently kind of thought about the ideas and tested them. So if you're going to get socialized to something, you might as well, good if you can get socialized to the truth. But still, it's one thing to, how does Bill Craig put it? It's one thing to know, it's another thing to show. So you may have total confidence, work of the Holy Spirit in your life, that what you believe is true, but that's not going to work to show somebody else that what you believe is true. So we need reasons too. That's why Peter says, always be ready to make an apologia, a defense, to give reasons for the hope that's within you, as 1 Peter 3:16, something like that. So what we're doing in the second step is we're just getting verification or justification for a person's point of view. Simply put, that's it. But we need that. Because if we need that, then if we don't get that, then we have no reason to take the other person's view seriously, and we want to give them an opportunity to give us reasons to take it seriously. Now, what happens if they don't have reasons? Well, first of all, they can't persuade a thoughtful person that their view is true. Secondly, if they don't have reasons, maybe that starts to eat away at them a little bit, and they're thinking, why do I believe things that I have no reasons to believe? Well, maybe I've been socialized to believe that. Well, maybe I've been socialized with a wrong view. I don't know, this could all go in their mind. I actually had somebody say to me when I asked him what your reasons are for the view that came up. Sorry about chuckling, but what he said is, I don't have any reasons to believe that. So now I had another question for him. I said, why would you believe something to be true that you have no reasons to believe it to be true? He said, I don't have any reason for that either. So some people just kind of are like that. But it's always legitimate to ask for the rationale, because you're presenting yourself as a thoughtful person who wants to think about these things. And if somebody offers an opposing point of view, you want to know the reasons why we should take it seriously. So what are they? And sometimes just that question by itself puts a stone in somebody else's shoe. So far we've gotten through basically 2 steps of the game plan, very simple. Gathering information, what do you mean by that? Reversing the burden of proof, how'd you come to that conclusion? And in each of those questions, we are getting an education about how robust a person's point of view actually turns out to be. And we are having ample opportunity for just in the questioning process for stones to be put in their shoe, and we haven't hardly done anything at all. And there's no risk to us at this stage. We're just asking questions. We are not putting anything on the table. Okay? Now, I want to give you, before we move into the third step, I want to give you 2 other thoughts. There's a liability that I call the professor's ploy that has to do with burden of proof, and I want you to see how to maneuver in that. And then there's another thing, how do you get out of the hot seat? And I want to talk about that. And this is still part of the first 2 steps of the game plan. Okay? It's not unusual for there to be professors, and some of you may have professors like this, that for some reason go way out of their way to attack Christianity in their classroom when the class and the topic and the issue have nothing to do with that. I've had students tell me that they've gone into a class on economics or something like that, and the professor said, how many Christians are in here? And Christians will raise their hand, and then he says, you will not be a Christian when I get through with you. So this happens a lot on the campus, and even if it's not announced like that, it still is it is demonstrated in the classrooms, okay? Lots of hostility, okay? Lots of people laughing at Christian views and ideas and stuff like that. And of course, the professor can find lots of things to make fun of, you know. One professor famously has a piece of chalk, and he says, if there's a God, I want him to stop this chalk from hitting the ground. And then he drops the chalk and it shatters on the ground, and he says, therefore there is no God. Okay, this is nonsense. It doesn't prove there is no God. It just proves that God is not a circus animal who's going to jump through this particular person's hoops whenever he's directed. And to show how foolish this is, because I've written about this particular illustration, you say to the professor, okay, I want to prove that you don't exist. I want you to take this chalk and put your hand out just like this and drop this chalk. And if it hits the ground, you exist. But if it doesn't hit the ground, then you don't exist. Then he puts his hand out, let's go to the chalk, and you reach out and grab it, catch it. You just catch it. It doesn't hit the ground. So you must not exist, professor. It's nonsense. It's foolishness. But this kind of foolishness gets, but you intervene, right? You intervene with an agent act to stop it from shattering, but it didn't happen. So, I mean, it just shows how silly this line of reasoning is. And, but the professors do this all the time, and they get a huge laugh. And anyone that's going to usually kind of oppose them is going to be persona non grata. You're the person who's the outlier. You're the weirdo, you know, that's going after the professor. But by the way, professors will do this, and they're going to be Christians who are going to want to stand up and oppose them, okay? So the professor's saying, well, the Bible's a bunch of fables, just stupid, blah, 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 blah. And some Christian in the audience is not going to take this lying down. He's going to raise his hand, and he's going to go after the professor, okay? And try to argue against the professor's view. Now, I think this is right-hearted, but I think it's wrong-headed, because it violates a basic rule of engagement. And that rule is you never make a frontal assault on a superior force in an entrenched position. This is stupid, okay? And the rule, by the way, is the man with the microphone is going to win, okay? Now, I'm not suggesting you necessarily break off the engagement, but it seems to me this is a good opportunity for your tactics to come in. Because if the person instead hears that the professor making these comments, I mean, if you were a student in the class, what question might you raise your hand and ask at this point of the discussion? Does a question come to mind? Like,
if there's a God, wouldn't he be great?
No, it's too complicated. You're already off on the wrong track. What question comes to mind?
What does this have to do with that?
What do you mean by that? You're way ahead of me. What do you mean by that? Let him talk. Then he explains what he means by that, and then, I don't know, what other question might pop into your mind? I'll give you another shot. How'd you come to that conclusion? Now, he may figure out that you're one of those Christians that's sandbagging a little bit back there. And so he might call you out. Oh, you must be a Christian. You must think the Bible's the Word of God, every jot and tittle. All right, why don't you stand up and explain to the rest of the class here why you think I'm wrong and you're right, why you think the Bible's the Word of God and not a bunch of fables. Go ahead, I'll give you 10 minutes. Go ahead. Okay, now what has the professor in that situation just done? He has reversed the burden of proof onto the student. And why is that an illicit move in this circumstance? Because the student hasn't made any claims, right? The professor made the claim, so it's the professor's job to defend his view. It isn't the Christian's job to defeat it. So here's what the student then says in employing this defense against the professor's ploy is to say, well, professor, you don't actually know what I believe because I've never said it. I mean, as far as you know, I agree with you. Okay? I just want to get clear on what it is you're saying and the reasons why you think it's true, that's all. Unless you want us all just to take what you say on faith. No, don't say that. You see the point? We are not going to get bullied by people pushing the burden of proof on us when it belongs to them. This happened to me by a philosophy professor at a university in Kansas, Topeka, Kansas. Can't even remember the name of the university. I won't give you the details of it. But he did that. Professor's ploy. He made a charge against me, and I mean, against, it was, had to do with the problem of evil. And then he made a very bold claim. And then he answered, he said, defeat the claim. Show me. And I said, that's not my job to do. Professor, it's your job to do. Actually, that wasn't the first thing he did. That was the second problem. The first thing he did is as I made my case regarding the problem of evil, I said something that he didn't like. And what the philosophy professor said first when he got up to the microphone is, I'm offended. I'm offended. Now, this, in our culture now, passes for an intelligent response to people now. He's a philosophy professor. Now, I can't say, do you have anything more substantive to say here than that your feelings were hurt? Professor. I thought I was talking to an adult. No, I can't say that because I got an audience of people who are going to misunderstand it. It'll sound snarky and it would be disrespectful, but it would be a fair response. That doesn't count, that your feelings hurt, when you're talking about the validity or legitimacy of an idea. If somebody has been unkind, they shouldn't have been unkind. But this was about the idea. And he had even apparently misunderstood my point where he got his feelings hurt because I was using a philosophical argument that hurt his feelings. Oh. You argue from the lesser to the greater, superiority, or whatever they call it. Anyway, so this is a professor's ploy, and when somebody else tries to make you disprove their view, they're using the ploy, professor or otherwise, and that's when you say, wait a minute, I didn't make the claim. You made the claim. I just want to know whether you've got any reasons. If you don't have any reasons, that's okay. Now I know. If you have reasons, I'm all ears. Just saying. Okay? So that's your defense against the professor's ploy, which is a burden of proof reversal. Okay? The second thing I want to show you is how to get out of the hot seat. Getting out of the hot seat. Okay? Now the hot seat, the way I'm using the term, is when you're, let's just say you're in persuasion mode. So you are trying to explain your point of view or making your case, but then the person is, so you're in. You're not just asking questions, but you're in somehow. And you realize that the person that you're up against is much better informed or more articulate or whatever than you are, and you find yourself out of your depth in that conversation, okay? This happened to me once on a flight to Jacksonville, Florida, and there was a guy next to me. He opened his computer, and there was a big bug, like a big, cool-looking beetle, but some people think it would be really ugly. And I quickly surmised that he was a bug doctor, which he was. Not a doctor who makes bugs better, but who studies bugs. He's an entomologist, you know. Now, and I started talking to him and drawing him out and talking about his bug, and which I like bugs, okay? And I used to collect all kinds of bugs when I was a kid. But I realize now, since he's a PhD in entomology, that I am not going to be very successful in trying to go into the details of entomology to show him that Darwinian explanation is not an adequate explanation. I tried that a little bit, and I realized I'm not going to go anywhere with this guy because he's thinking, I'm smart, this guy's dumb. I'm the PhD, this guy doesn't even believe in evolution. Why should I even listen to him? So that was strategically, that was not a good direction for me to go. So I ended up going a different direction that I felt more comfortable in, actually a philosophic direction, but it broadly dealt with this issue. So you're going to find yourself in discussions where you feel out of your depth, all right? And the other person is coming on rather strong, and you're maybe backpedaling a little bit, and you don't know what to say, and you're a bit overwhelmed, and you're thinking, I wish I would have never opened up my big fat mouth. And you're looking for the door, but you know, it's 36,000 feet, so that's not going to work. That's the hot seat. Now, let me ask you a question. When a person is in a circumstance like I just described, who is in the control of that conversation? The Christian or the non-Christian? Tell me. The non-Christian is. That's why the Christian feels so uncomfortable, because they're out of control. They are being driven around by somebody else. They don't know where they're going, and they don't want to go there, wherever. Okay? So what I want to do is I'll show you a technique that's a variation of our first 2 steps of our game plan that will allow you to get back in the driver's seat very quickly and make something profitable of the discussion, even though it may not be going in the direction that you want it to go. And what I want you to do is I want you to employ a little bit of what I call like a conversational Aikido. Now, Aikido is a self-defense form, as I understand it, where you actually don't oppose the other person's force. You use their force to your advantage, like judo or something like that, okay? So instead of trying to push back, we're going to say, come on down, all right? And here's what we're going to say. Here's how we do that. We're going to say, wow, you know a lot about this stuff. Actually, you know more about this than I do, or something like that. Acknowledge what's going on there. Wow, and I don't know how to answer all of this, but I wonder if you could do me a favor. Could you slow down just a little bit and help me clearly understand, and you can use whatever words you want. I'm just role-playing an example. Help me clearly understand what your view is. That's Columbo number 1, right? And your reasons for it. That's Columbo number 2. All right? And you might even get a piece of paper and take some notes or make mental notes or something. And all you've done here is you've shifted immediately and completely into student mode. You are not in persuasive mode anymore. You're outgunned. But you're going to make something of this. You're going to learn something from the circumstance. You're going to let them talk. Give me your point of view and your reasons for it, something like that. And then you make a mental note, or you write it down. Writing it down is even better because you're going to want to come back to this. And then you say to them, then let me think about it. Then let me think about it. Them's the magic words. I mentioned it this morning. Those are the magic words because do you have any responsibility to answer the charge when you say, let me think about it? No, you're already acknowledging that you're out of your depth. You can't answer that thing. Give me what you got and let me think about it. So you're off the hook. But you're getting an education. And, by the way, at this point, when you say that, something like I just described, now who's in the driver's seat? The Christian or the non-Christian? Well, the Christian is. Just like that, you've changed the dynamic. Now, you're not going to probably win that person to Christ, but what you are doing is you are putting yourself in a comfortable position, and now you're able to learn. Now, if you take notes about what their view is and the reasons why, then on your own, at your leisure, when the pressure is off, you can check it out. So you do what you say you're going to do. You're going to think about it on your own, at your leisure, when the pressure is off. Then you can go to str.org or some other website or some book that you have, or talk to somebody in your church staff that's more conversant in these kinds of things and get the answers. And in fact, I encourage you to even take that which you've written down and make a little cheat sheet out of it. Here was the challenge, here are the reasons, and here's what I learned. And once you do that, then you've got the content for next time around. If you have another time, maybe not with that person, but with someone else. And see, this is one of the important things about the Columbo tactic, how you can improve it. And that's by going back to the conversations that you have had that didn't go so well and ask yourself what happened. And it's the easiest way to do that is before the pressure's off or after the pressure's off, before the challenge or after the challenge. So I was in a church in Indiana, I think, and I was teaching a Sunday service on Columbo. So I had 45 minutes to kind of do the 2 steps, which is a little hard, but I can get it done. And when the pastor gives the prayer, I'm sneaking down the aisle to get in the foyer to be able to be there to greet people as they go out. And right when he finishes, there's a young lady that penetrates first, right? So people are still in the church, and she's coming out, and I'm there. And she shakes my hand, and then she says, I'm a Christian, and how did she put it? I'm a Christian, and I'm a Buddhist, and I'm a pagan. All 3. So what do I say? Okay? I say, well, it sounds to me like you don't understand those three religions. Now, let me ask you something. Is that a question? No, it's an insult, right? My words are still bouncing around on the inside of that church about the Columbo tactic, and I didn't even employ it with the first person that comes out and challenges me. So she says to me, well, I think I do understand those religions. And then, I come to my senses, and I use a question. And I say to her, what do you think Jesus would have said about that, your statement? Okay, now that's a good question. Because she said she was a Christian. That means she must think she's some kind of follower of Jesus. So what do you think Jesus would have said about that? And she says, I think Jesus would have been just fine about that. And then the mob kind of carries her away. She's gone. But afterwards, I got to thinking. Fortunately, I kind of, got my feet and repaired my mistake a little bit. But what would I have said in response to the point she made that I wasn't able to respond to because the mob came through? When she says, I think Jesus would be fine with that. Well, I'm thinking about it. Right? So that next time this comes up, I will have this question in place. And my response, now that I thought of, was, can you cite any passage? Where can you show me something like this? Can you show me where Jesus said anything that would give you the impression that it's okay with him for you to believe in him and be a pagan and a Buddhist, which is what her claim was. Now, she's not going to be able to do that because there is no verse that's even close. In fact, Jesus' claim is just the opposite. But I thought, I haven't used that yet, but I'm ready for it. Something like this comes up again, okay? So this is a way of preparing yourself to do better. And that is by, reflecting on when you do badly. We all do badly at different times. We make a poor showing, but we have an opportunity to reflect back if we take the time to do it and learn from it. So it's all a learning process, all right? So let me take a moment and answer any questions that you might have. And I think we need to, after a few questions, we'll take a short break because we're almost at 2 o'clock. I know lunch really knocks people out, and I've lost some of you. I see you drifting into the arms of Morpheus, and fortunately you have done so quietly, and I appreciate that. So we'll take a break in a moment. Question?
I've got 2 questions. Is that better? I've got 2 questions. The first one is, are any of the other resources updated, like the anniversary edition of the book, or?
My things that I've written, no. This was the only one that I've rewritten. Story of Reality just came out 3 years ago, and I'm not rewriting that one because it's not the kind of thing that would benefit from adding more information. Relativism came out in 98, and there's been some discussion about rewriting that one, but I co-authored it with Frank Beckwith, and so we're probably not going to do that.
What about the DVD? Is it based on
the
first
DVDs
book?
are updated.
Okay.
The DVD for the tactics is now updated.
Okay.
And so I have a DVD and a workbook for the tactics that reflect the new information in the 10th anniversary edition.
Perfect.
And I also have a DVD and a workbook for the Story of Reality. So
Okay.
it's like a full-fledged deal for both of them, and they're updated.
Okay, and the second question I've wanted to ask you since I read the book years ago, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to explain myself, but when you engage with people and you try to put the burden on them to prove their point, have you ever had anybody who realizes you're doing that and try to argue that it's not their responsibility to prove their point?
Well, I don't know if I've ever had anybody make that particular objection. And the reason is because it seems self-evident that if you're going to make a claim, then it's appropriate to give reasons why you think the claim is true. If there's no reasons, if they don't bear the burden of proof, then if they aren't willing to bear any burden of proof, then there is no justification for me taking their point of view seriously. all right? Now, recently there has been a move, I'd say in the last 10 years, by atheists to do something like this. And here's what atheists say, and I have said this publicly a number of times. If I was an atheist, I would never go this direction because I do not think it's intellectually honest. But virtually every atheist plays this kind of game, I guess. They redefine atheism to be not a belief that there is no God, which is the classical definition of atheism, atheism, no God. What they say is theism is a belief in God, and that atheists, therefore, lack a belief in God, and you don't have to defend a lack of something, of a belief. You only have to defend a belief. So only theists bear a burden of proof. No atheist has any responsibility to give any reasons why there is no God. Now, this is a gambit. This is a shell game, and I'll show you. I'll tell you why. And this, by the way, I wrote a mentoring letter on this particular issue, so this is available. But it's the kind of thing we send out, so you're ready for this kind of stuff. The way to deal with this is you say to the atheist, you say, "I'm going to make a statement. And I want to know what your response to the statement is." And you have only three possibilities. You could affirm the statement, you could deny the statement, or you can withhold. All right? Like you don't affirm and you don't deny, you're somewhere in the middle, you don't know whether to affirm or deny. Are you with me so far? That's pretty straightforward. There are no other categories. You affirm it, you deny it. As long as it's an unambiguous statement, you either affirm it or deny it, or you're not sure. Fair enough. Okay, here's the statement. God exists. And I say, well, I have no belief. No, that's not what I asked you. You guys are the clear thinkers. You're the rational crowd. You're what Daniel Dennett calls the brights. He's one of the new atheists. So he identifies atheists as brights, like bright people. We're the smart people, you're the dumb people. So we're the brights. Okay, fine, you're the brights. So I've just given you a statement. You can do one of three things with it. You can say yes, no, maybe so. So what is your response? Now, an atheist is not going to say that's a true statement because they don't think it's true. They think it's false. But that means they can't say, I don't know. Or they can't say, I'm on the fence. They do think they know, even though their knowledge is not omniscience. It's defeasible. They could be mistaken. But even so, that's not their conviction. They think it's a false statement. So they have no belief in God, but they have a belief about God. And the belief they have about God is that there is none. That's a point of view. People do not write books about their non-beliefs. These guys are writing books. What are you writing about? Your non-beliefs? No, you're writing about your conviction there is no God. God is not good, how religion spoils everything, or ruins everything, or whatever it is, that title. And a whole host of others, that these guys have written. Okay, the grand delusion. What's the grand delusion? That God exists. He doesn't. Richard Dawkins. So there's a case, kind of to your point, that in a roundabout way, that some people, the only time that I know that people have rejected the idea of a burden of proof upon them is when atheists try to use this ploy to avoid any responsibility for defending their view. But they have a view. There is a thing called non-belief. I have no belief about the best football team, rugby team in Britain. I can't even name one. So I have no belief about it. Aye or nay? But atheists have a belief about God, and their belief is he doesn't exist. And therefore they have something to defend. They have a burden of proof that falls upon them properly, I think. Okay, thank you for that question. One other question here. Let's take the guy in the yellow jacket there, yeah. The bumblebee.
This, I guess, is a discipleship type question. With the approach of keep asking questions, is there a risk of you being converted back?
A risk of?
Of the person, like the Christian trying to, keep asking the questions, and the guy answers his questions, and he loses his faith.
And I keep missing the last thing that you're saying. Is the
He
risk?
said that he would lose his faith. If is there a chance that the Christian will lose his faith by going down the question road?
There's always a risk when you have opposing point of views that your own point of view is going to be effectively challenged. There's always that risk. That risk exists whether you engage people or not, because they're going to come after you, you're going to hear about it, whatever, okay? The best defense against that kind of thing is apologetics. It's having good reasons for your own views. And I've often said that some people say, apologetics are illicit because you can't argue people into the kingdom. And the answer to that is multiple. Well, first of all, if they're not right to use, then Jesus used it, the apostles used it, and they're commanded in Scripture, and they work. That is, lots of people respond to arguments under the influence of the Holy Spirit, be drawn into the kingdom. But what I also add is that apologetics will help you defend against the biggest or the toughest critic you'll ever face, and that's yourself. If you know the reasons why the Christian worldview is sound and other worldviews are not, is kind of taken as a whole, you're going to be able to put yourself back to sleep when you wake up in the middle of the night and you wonder whether you're wishing on a star or not. And that's going to be increasingly important as it becomes more costly in our culture for Christians to be faithful to Christ. And it is happening, and it will continue, and it'll get worse. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think I will be. All right, let's take a break. Maybe a 10-minute break here, Pastor. And set your clocks, and we'll have our final segment together when we return.
10 minutes from now, 2:13, we're back in the saddle.
Hey, to our online audience right now, as we take this break here, if you have any questions that you'd like to submit online or be part of that discussion, we invite you to do that at this time. Again, we encourage you to go to the Stand to Reason website, str.org, and go up to the top right-hand corner where you can subscribe and get more of this information that you hear Greg talking about today. Subscribe to the newsletters that they send out, to the mentoring emails that he gives. And you can also search on their website, that's website right there. You can search for some of the topics, or if you have some friends you want to ask questions about, or they've approached you with a question, there's a great resources of both articles, podcasts, and videos available that answer some of those questions. So this is a great resource that you can do. Again, we do have here on campus some of the resources that Greg has brought today available. They will be available again tomorrow morning here at Waterbrook in between and after services for the supply that is left. And you'll, of course, be able to do that. You can also search under Greg Koukl, Koukl is how you spell his last name, and do that search on Amazon, and you'll find a number of these resources also available there. As a matter of fact, some of the books are available not only as print books, but also as a Kindle if you want to get them for your device. We'll come back with some questions after this. We'll be back at 2:13. Around then, as we continue this live stream. Leave this live stream running because it will continue here while we show some slides during the break, and we'll continue right here on this channel. You don't need to click anywhere, don't stop anything, just let it roll through. You'll hear some music play while we're doing this, and then we'll be right back in around 10 minutes or so. Thank you for joining us here for this Saturday seminar on tactics with Greg Koukl at Waterbrook Bible Fellowship. less than a minute away from getting back to our live stream here and to Greg's final presentation this afternoon. If you want to be part of our Who's Your One campaign here at Waterbrook, we do want to invite you that last week we introduced and we're putting initials on balls that we put in a display out here. And if you'd like to participate in that, even if you're watching online and there's someone that you're praying for and they're your one that you've identified, we would love to pray for you. So if you send us those initials on the live stream, in the comments, or even in an email to the office, we'll make sure that we put those initials on one of the balls and add it to the display in our lobby, our Who's Your One display for 2021. I hope that you're praying for someone that you care about to come to faith in Christ. And now it's time to return here to the Waterbrook Bible Fellowship campus for the final session of our Saturday seminar and tactics presentation with Greg Koukl. And now we're back for our presentation. We're back on the campus here of Waterbrook Bible Fellowship and live for our final session of Tactics with Greg Koukl. Wait. Greg, just a moment here. Your mic isn't on, Greg. Greg, we do have an online question if you don't mind taking one.
No. Thank you for the alert on that. I hear myself just fine. There's always a little attrition rate every break, you know. Pretty soon we'll be in negative numbers. This is our final session, partly because it's always a good idea for the speaker to lead before the audience does. But what I want to do in our final session is I want to go into the step 3 of the Columbo tactic, give you an idea how that works. I acknowledge from the beginning that it is an advanced tactic, so I don't expect anyone to be able to use this or be willing to use this right off the bat. But it's actually not that hard if some other things are in place first, okay? We talked about this as a game plan that will allow us to garden, and the game plan has actually 3 parts, and we talked about the first 2 parts already. We are going to use questions, because that's the essential game plan, to gather information. We are going to use questions to reverse the burden of proof where appropriate. In the 3rd step, we are going to use questions to make a point. So just write that down like that. We're going to use questions to make a point. In the first edition of the book, I said use questions to lead. So you're leading them somewhere with questions, and of course that concept hasn't changed. I just found different words to explain it. Make a point is simply easier to do. Use questions to make a point. Now, I'm closing the session off by finishing up the game plan. There are all these other tactics that are in the book that come into play in different ways that I just want to commend to you. But I think the book does a really good job of explaining them, and so I don't go into detail in this kind of situation because I really want to get the foundation laid with the game plan. And the rest of it, once you get the foundation, the rest of it's easy, okay? It's easy to apply and to grow with, all right? Incidentally, remember I told you earlier that I get people tell me on occasion that they were in my garden before they were committed Christians. Well, somebody in the audience here just told me that at our lunch break, you know, that they were in. So I'm always glad to hear that, but it happens. It happens, and fortunately, I'm somebody who gets an opportunity to hear that. Most of you probably aren't going to know the influence you had on somebody else if it was a passing relationship who ended up becoming a Christian somewhat because of the input in the gardening that you did. I'm fortunate in this regard. The 3rd step is to use your questions to make a point. Now, there are 2 kinds of points that you could be making. One kind of point might be a way of expressing your own point of view by using questions. So the point you want to make is advancing your view, okay, by using questions. And for example, there was somebody who called on a radio show many years ago, and he was a fairly new Christian. In fact, he told me that. He said, I'm a new Christian. And I said, great, welcome to the family. Glad you're on board. And then he said, but you know what, I have these 2 roommates that are not Christians, and they don't believe like I do. I have my view, but they have their view, and I don't understand why I need to explain or tell them about Christ. Now, obviously, he's getting some heat from his friends, and so he's backing off a little bit, a little spooked. And so he's calling me for some advice. Now, I have a point of view on this, but I don't want to go straight for it. I think I could do better, be more persuasive, more effective if I, in a sense, beat around the bush a little bit with some questions. So the first thing I said is, well, you're a new Christian, right? And I said, why did you become a Christian? He said, well, the reason I became a Christian is because I wanted to be forgiven. Good answer. Okay, that's the biblical answer. And I said, that's great. I said, what would have happened, though, if you had not become a Christian? I said, well, then I wouldn't be forgiven. Pretty straightforward. And then I have to pay for my own sins against God, or somehow he put it like that, you know. And so I just paused. I didn't say anything. So dead air is not good on radio, but sometimes it punctuates something. And so he said that, and then I just waited. And in like 3 or 4 seconds, I hear him go, oh, like that. Like the light went on. He said, so if I didn't believe in Jesus so that I could get my sins forgiven, then if my friends don't believe in Jesus, then they won't get their sins forgiven, and they would have to pay for them themselves. I say, bingo. Now, he knew it. He knew the right answer. And I've actually had this kind of conversation a number of times with people. Although nowadays, if you ask people, why did they become a Christian, or what does it mean for them to be a Christian, you might get a very, very different kind of answer because of what is called progressive Christianity. And progressive Christianity is Christianity in, I would say, name only. And when it comes to theological convictions, they're all very theologically liberal. So Jesus isn't God. The Bible's not the Word of God. You're not going to heaven or hell. That's not what it's all about. It's all about social justice and that kind of stuff. So the left has captured Christianity and progressive Christianity. This is having a big impact in our culture right now. I have a friend who's written a fabulous book, and it's right at the top of the bestsellers right now. It's called Another Gospel. Another Gospel. And the author is Alisa Childers, A-L-I-S-A, Childers, C-H-I-L-D-E-R-S, or Childers, Alisa Childers. Anyway, some of you who remember like the 90s and the Christian music scene, she was a Zoe girl. If you remember, who knows the Zoe girls? I never heard of them before. You know? Don knows the Zoe girls. Well, it's Alisa and her friends, but they've disbanded. She's married, she's a mom. Then she almost lost her convictions. And through progressive Christianity, she's written this great book. It's in the, you know, inside the top 1,000 at Amazon right now, which is fabulous. It's doing great. But if you're struggling with people who are dealing with progressive Christianity, that's the book to read. So sometimes people have just not connected the dots. They understand solid Christianity, ask them, why'd you become a Christian? And then, you know, then they're able to do that. That's what happened in this particular case. But notice how I used a couple questions to kind of get them on board, to help them out, to be reflecting on what I thought they already knew, all right? Now, there was another event kind of like this that a number of years ago where there was a gentleman during the Q&A who said to me, prove to me that God exists. Now, he wasn't a non-Christian, I don't think, but he was role-playing, basically. He wanted to know how I would respond to that, okay? And to me, it's a little bit like, it's a little bit like somebody says to a comedian, oh, you're a comedian? Be funny, you know? And it's like, make a joke right now, you know, like, I'm on the spot. I was actually at Babylon Bee a month or so ago, and there was a comedian. Did you see that? And he was pretty funny, actually. But I want to say, okay, be funny, make a joke. Anyway, so that's the situation. So the guy says, prove to me God exists. I said, well, you know, there's a difficulty with your challenge, and I want you to think about it. Maybe you can help me out here. The difficulty is, first of all, you said prove. Now, if anybody ever asks you to prove anything, you always have to ask a question. What counts as proof? Now, this is a variation of what do you mean by that? You're getting a definition. Because if you do not deal with that, with a skeptic, you will never get anywhere. I promise you. Because what the skeptic, you can give all kinds of evidence, and the skeptic is going to listen to it all, and when you're done, they're going to say, yeah, but that's not proof. Okay? And then, so that's one problem I pointed out to the gentleman. I said, the second one is you said prove to me. So now I've got a psychology to deal with. I don't know what your resistance level is. I don't know where you're at. I don't know how I could persuade you. So asking me to persuade you is asking too much. So then I said, can you reframe your question in light of those concerns? And he says, yeah, can you give me any good reason to believe in God? Okay, now that's much better. I mean, there might be good reason, might be a fudge word, but I can work with that. Fine. I can give what I think is a good reason. Then I said to him, do you mind if I ask you a few questions? Okay, now you guys know where I'm going. Okay, now this is Columbo 3, because now I'm going to lead to a destination. And this is one reason why Columbo 3 is an advanced tactic, because in the first 2, you don't need to know anything except for the game plan basics and the questions, because you're just gathering 2 different kinds of information, the idea and the reasons for the idea, okay? But in the third, you're going to make a point, and you're going to use your questions to shoot at a target. The target is your point. You're going to use questions like that. But you have to have a target in mind. And if you don't have a target in mind, you got nothing to shoot for. And so if you're, in this particular case, the target is a case for God that I could kind of unwrap in a fairly quick way. And that's why this is an advanced technique. So I almost lost my place there. So back to the question then. So now I can make a case for God fairly quickly. It's a very simple thing. I actually did this exact same thing, not just in that church environment, but at the University of Toronto in a Q&A. And so with an atheist at the microphone. Now, by the way, I might say something here. What I'm going to tell you is going to be, I think you're going to consider it a very compelling proof, rationale, whatever. But that does not mean that somebody that you share this with is going to be the least bit influenced. Because there are other things that are going on than just reasons in the mind. Suppressing the truth and unrighteousness, remember that in Romans 1? You know, that's a huge, right? So there's lots of resistance that people have to changing their minds about an idea that requires a change in their life. Okay, so we don't expect more than what any human contribution can make, whether it's an argument or the simple gospel or loving them to death. That still may not bring them into the kingdom. It requires the Holy Spirit. On anybody's theology, Arminian or Calvinist, the Holy Spirit's an essential part of the process. Okay? So, as it turned out, in Toronto, this atheist was completely unfazed. You know, maybe I'll remember to tell you how that ended. But it was basically the same thing that I presented to this man. I said, you mind if I ask you a few questions? Proof about God, okay? And he goes, no, go ahead. By the way, if I ever ask you that, duck, all right? So I said, the first couple are really simple, but I just want to, you know, lay this out a little bit. Do you think that things exist? Yeah. Even people who say, well, maybe I'm just a butterfly dreaming. Well, then butterflies exist, right? Okay, and all I got to do to make my case is just have something exists. I think, therefore I am. Cogito ergo sum, you know, so if you're thinking being, then you must be a being. That's all I need. So things exist, whatever they are, they exist, yes, not controversial. The things that exist now, second question, did they always exist? No. Most people will say that because they realize that almost nobody believes that the universe is eternal. And there are scientific reasons and philosophic reasons why that cannot be the case. It's just false that the universe is forever. And the biggest scientific reason is Big Bang cosmology. There was when the universe was not. And at that time, according to the view, there wasn't even a was. Time, space, physical continuum came into existence at some point in the past and is expanded into the present and will continue into the future. So the universe has a birth and a history. The universe, not just the solar system, the whole thing, everything. Before them, there wasn't empty space. There wasn't even space on this view. So that's pretty standard now. People who know a few things accept that. Now, if you don't believe in Big Bang, it's okay. You don't have to. They do. So we're just trading on that. We believe in a beginning like they believe in a beginning. There was when none of this stuff was, except for, on our view, God. And I'm going to get to that in a moment. That's where this argument is going, okay? So, yes, I believe things exist. No, I don't believe they always existed. Okay, so everything came into existence at some point in the past. Yes, okay, good. Now I got my foundation. Third question. This one's the one that counts. What caused the universe to come into existence? Now, I'll help you out because there are only two choices. Something or no thing. What say you? Now, I'm trading on a rational concept here. It's called the law of excluded middle and the law of non-contradiction. In other words, when you say something or no thing, there's no middle. There's no in-between, okay? It's either something or no thing. The negation of the one, that's it. Two options, very tight, okay? It can't be neither because there's no third option, and it can't be both. Law of non-contradiction, if you speak that language, so now you know what's going on. But for most of you don't know the terms, but you see it's common sense, right? Now, the atheist does not want to say something because that would have to be something outside of the natural order, non-material. If they're committed to materialism, that it's only physical, natural things that exist that are pushed around by natural law, there can't be something outside of that. If you say something outside of the material system caused it, well, now you're in really uncomfortable territory because that something is not just something, but it's going to have to be someone because only agents start, watch this, causal chains. Only agents begin things happening. If it's just dominoes falling, you always ask, well, where was the prior domino? There are no prior dominoes at the origin of the universe, not physically, okay? So if it was caused by something, it's got to be some one kind of thing, not just a thing. And it has to be someone outside of the material universe, outside of historical time, pretty powerful, pretty smart. Okay, you see where I'm going? This is pretty close to what we mean when we say God. And it certainly is consistent with the God of the Bible that we put our confidence in, right? Now, the atheist doesn't want to go there. So what other option is left for him? No thing caused the universe for no reason. That's it. But my response is that the odds-on favorite? That's the question. Because no thing causing the universe for no reason is worse than magic. With magic, you have a magician pulling a rabbit out of a hat. But now you got no magician, and you got no hat. You got just the rabbit popping into existence. You see the point I'm making here? Okay, so this is like back to the Brights guy. I always forget his name. Daniel Dennett. Okay, you're the bright people. You're the rational people. No thing or something. No thing caused it. Really? You think that's the odds-on favorite? By the way, this isn't strictly speaking, I'm not making a proof that's not defeasible, that's could possibly, incorrigible, No, this could be mistaken. I'm not going for that. I'm just saying what makes most sense. So, gentlemen, if your wife comes home from work someday and she looks in the garage, she said, "Honey, what's that Mercedes SL doing in the garage?" And you say, "Darling, it just appeared out of nothing. No cause. There it was, right in our garage." I mean, that's the way scientists think the universe started, so I don't know why it can't happen with a little bitty old Mercedes. But darling, it has your name on the license plate. Hey, multiverse. Come on. The point here is that you only have two options. One is reasonable and one is not. And the atheist one is the one that's not reasonable. Because reason goes with the odds-on favorite. And to give you an idea of how even atheists know this intuitively, I was having dinner at a home of a very well-known, let's just say, religious person. And at dinner, his 18-year-old son across the way announced to the dinner party that he didn't believe in God anymore. I mean, this was like out of nowhere. And what a shock to his dad. I'm here, his dad's here. And so I'm doing my best to try to talk to him a little bit about this, But he had a real attitude and he wasn't interested in talking about it. He just wanted to blather on about rejecting this stupid, it's irrational. Now, if somebody ever says that your belief about God is irrational, then you always ask them, what is irrational about it? What do you mean by that? It's irrational, really? What about specifically about my belief is contrary to reason? They have to fess up with that. They can't just get away with doing that. You got to ask them for that. Maybe it is irrational. Let me know. So I'm asking, but he's not playing at all. He doesn't want to have a discussion. And so I did the Big Bang and the Big Banger stuff, and he blah, 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 blah. I said, look my final shot across the bow, right? If somebody, we're here in the dining area, and there's a living room over here, and there was a door, front door. I said, if you heard this, on that door over there, what would you think? Would you think that the knock knocked itself? Or would you think that someone was at the door knocking? Now, this is a really good point, but he wasn't, again, he wasn't interested. So he just let it go, and I let the conversation die, and a little bit later we're having a dessert, and as God is my witness, right there at the front door. There's the sound, okay? Boom, 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 boom. He lifts his head up from dessert and he goes, who's there? Who's that? Something like that. And I said, nobody. Now, the key is what he did next. He didn't presume that the knock knocked itself. Rather, he got up and he answered the door, and it was his friends, okay? Now, notice that when turf is not being defended, he does the common sense thing. He thinks that effects have causes that are adequate to explain the effects. And the same thing is true with the origin of the universe. Okay? So now what I've given you is an example of using Columbo number 3, employing questions, okay, to get to a point where I can make a point, okay? And that is, it's reasonable to believe that something, not no thing, caused it. If you want to believe that no thing caused it, that's irrational and unreasonable. So there's your rational argument for the existence of God. Now, that has a fancy schmancy name. It's called the Kalam cosmological argument. All cosmological arguments for God are arguments for God based on the mere existence of the universe. Okay, and there are other kinds of arguments, but that's the kind of argument that I just offered. But I try to do it in kind of common sense terms without a lot of the philosophical mumbo jumbo. Big Bang needs a Big Banger. I mean, that's the Kalam argument right there. So I mentioned William Lane Craig. He's popularized that argument, but that's the simple way to understand it. I want you to notice something that I did, though. And I talk about this in the second edition of the book, the 10th anniversary edition, that there is a way that you can enlist the person who's making the challenge onto your team to help you make the point, okay? So what if in this particular illustration that I offered, what if I said, okay, things exist, and they haven't always existed, and that means they must have come into existence at some point of time. And the best explanation for the cause of them coming into existence is something, not nothing. Actually, if it was no thing, it wouldn't be a cause at all. There would be no cause. Now, that's the same argument, but just, baldly stated. And you notice that there are steps along the way. If I'm saying this, then I'm saying this, then I'm saying this, then I come to a conclusion, okay? The problem with doing it that way is that whenever you try to put a piece of your argument on the table, your opponent, your opposition, can say, wait a minute, I don't agree with that. You're not right. It could have been this. I can explain that. Blah, 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 blah. You invite that every time you offer a point to build toward your conclusion. So sometimes it's very hard to get to your conclusion. They won't let you go there. And with all the jibber-jabber in between, they lose the line of thought. That's where your tactical game plan shines, because what I did here is I enlisted that person to help me. And instead of making a statement where I put a piece on the table, I asked a question that elicited a common sense, authentic response that is the piece I want on the table. He put it there. I didn't put it there. And if he put it there, yes, things exist. Did they always exist? No, they didn't always exist. What caused them to exist? Something or nothing. That's my last thing. He can't object to those first two things because my questions invited him to put those pieces on the table himself. He's not going to take them off because he put them there. You see the point I'm making? And let me give you one other example of this. I mentioned Daniel Dennett. Daniel Dennett is, he is, let me back up and put it this way. There's a big problem for materialists, and the problem is called consciousness. Materialists think, this isn't a person who goes to the mall too much. Philosophically, a materialist is a person who thinks the only things that are real are material things. Things that can be accessed by the five senses, okay? So, for example, souls don't exist because souls are allegedly immaterial selves, but there are no immaterial anything, and so there are no souls. So notice how the philosophy is driving conclusions about the nature of the world. The problem is that we're all conscious. Well, most of us in this room. And consciousness is not physical. They've worked really hard at trying to reduce consciousness to something physical, but they cannot do it. And it's such a serious problem that notable philosopher like Thomas Nagel writes a book called Mind and Cosmos. It's a small book. And if you got a little philosophic background, it's not hard to follow. But the title of it, Mind and Cosmos, the subtitle is How the Materialistic Darwinian View of the Universe is Almost Certainly False. And he's an atheist. And why is he taking this view? Because he knows that materialism eliminates one of the most salient details of the real universe, and that is consciousness. Consciousness is real, and it's not physical. So materialism, at least the way it's currently characterized, must be false. Now, he took a lot of heat for this, but he's a really smart guy. How does Daniel Dennett respond? Daniel Dennett, one of the new atheists, says, consciousness is an illusion. Now, pardon me, and how can I put this? Well, let me put it this way, more delicately. This is one of the most foolish things I've ever heard an intelligent person say. And I'll tell you why. It turns out that this notion, this statement, is self-refuting. But how am I going to get to that point and show the objector, and you as well, that that's the case? Consciousness is an illusion. So I have a first question, and my first question is going to be my Colombo first question. What do you mean by consciousness? What is consciousness? Okay, well, it's awareness, okay? It is an awareness. That's the simplest way to put it, probably. Our conscious states are our aware states, okay? What is an illusion? Well, an illusion is, it's like when we think something is real, but it's not. I mean, there are different ways of putting this, but when we think we're seeing an illusion. It's not really there, but it appears to be real, but it's not. So it's an appearance of something that's not real, okay? But notice the first way I characterize it, when we think something is there. Okay, next question. Can non-conscious things have an illusion? Well, no. Can that chair have an illusion? No. Can a rock have an illusion? No. So only conscious things can have an illusion. Is that right? Are you with me so far? Some of you see where I'm going. If consciousness is an illusion, and you have to have consciousness to have the illusion of consciousness, what or who is having the illusion? Is the illusion having an illusion? Now, that's the final question. Notice I got the definitions and clarity in place by asking this. There's a little more complicated kind of issue because you have to be, I think, probably a little more philosophically trained to see the problem here. but it's a huge problem. Consciousness cannot be an illusion because you have to be conscious to have the illusion to begin with. Consciousness is real. Incidentally, if you think I'm mistaken about Daniel Dennett's after break or wherever, get on YouTube, type in Daniel Dennett, consciousness is an illusion. You'll see him. There he is sitting on his patio on a chair talking about how consciousness is an illusion. Why does he have to say it's an illusion? Because it doesn't fit in his worldview. And if it doesn't fit in his worldview box, it must not be real. Instead of taking his cues from reality and building his worldview based on reality, he imports a foreign worldview called materialism, which they don't justify. In other words, they don't give reasons why materialism is true. They accept it, presuming that the only thing real is what we know in the five senses. But you can't do math with the five senses. You can only do math with your mind. And math only works if math is immaterial. It's in the non-material realm. You can exemplify it, 4 chairs, but 2 chairs plus 2 chairs make 4 chairs. That's real without the chairs. Your mind is capable of seeing those relationships and coming to the conclusion that that's a truth. And our minds are able to do all these things, and all of this activity is in the immaterial realm, okay? Now notice, again, I'm kind of giving you substance about evidence for the soul, but when the objection comes up, I'm using my tactical tool. I'm using the third use of Columbo, asking the questions to get me where I want to go. Now, I know where I want to go. You got to know that first. And you learn that from lots of different places. But when you learn what's wrong with a view and the reasons what's wrong with the view, your step as a tactician now is to think, what questions can I ask that are legitimate questions that will build to that point, so I can enlist the person who's objecting as an ally to get him to affirm common sense notions that are part of my argument. Puts them on the table. Then when I go to the conclusion, there's no place for that person to go, except for just to bald-facedly deny the conclusion. And then I can't do anything about that. If I have constructed my argument in a legitimate way, and it naturally leads to an end, a conclusion, then if they want to deny that, I've done my job. I can't do anything more. And that's Columbo number 3. And I got gazillions of more illustrations of this kind of thing. They're all in the book, but except for the consciousness is illusion. I don't know if that's in there or not. But in any event, I had a student come up to me and says, my professor at the university, she's studying anthropology, she's fine with my Christianity until I told her I wanted to be a missionary. And the professor said to the Christian anthropology student, it's wrong for you to try to how does she put it, interfere with other people's religious views, or try to disagree with people's religious views. So if you're a missionary, you're going and you're taking your religion to another place where they believe another religion, and you're trying to tell them that religious view is false and ours is true. And she said, you shouldn't be doing that. And so she comes to me. And she says, how do I deal with this? How do I answer this? Now, I want you to think about that challenge. And I want you to give me a question that you can ask in light of Columbo number 3 that would show the problem of the professor making this statement to the Christian. It's wrong for you to try to change other people's religious views. Yes, ma'am. I'll repeat it.
I would say, are you trying to change my view?
Yes, there you go. Okay, right on it. Bingo. Good job. Are you trying to change my religious view? Now, I would make a little alteration. I would say, if it's wrong to change other people's religious views, why are you trying to change mine? Little variation. We're in both in the same ballpark. You see, the teacher is doing exactly the same thing that she's telling the student not to do, because Christianity is an evangelistic religion. It's at the core of our religion. The Great Commission depends upon it. We can't make disciples until we make them Christians and then disciple them. So when someone says you shouldn't be pushing your religious views on other people, then they are essentially pushing their view on us and trying to silence our own religious convictions, all right? So it becomes a self-refuting statement. That's what the concept of being a suicidal point of view comes in. That was really well done, okay? So you see how that works. I'm just looking at the clock here, and I had an idea. We just got about 15 more minutes. And what I think may be a good way to end this, we could take 10 minutes to 15 minutes of questions if you want. I don't know if you've got Pastor from. Sometimes what I like to do is take about 15 minutes to role play, and I'll be the Christian and you guys be the opponents. And so what you do is you ask me a question or raise some objection against Christianity, and what I'll do is I'll try to respond to that by using my tactical approach, so you can see it in play. Would you like to try that? Is that all right? Well, she's loaded for bear over there. Look at, yeah, like ka-ching, you know. I mean, she's racking her Glock right there. So, okay. But let me just a warning. I never know how these things are going to go, because I've done this a number of times, and sometimes it's not pretty. But that's all right, because these kinds of things are often messy. When we engage people about these topics, it doesn't always go according to the book. You know, sometimes it just gets awkward and unusual, and it's not helpful, whatever. So I don't know. But what I'm going to do is I want you guys to be in character as someone who raises a challenge, and I will do my best to try to respond to that using my tactical approach. So that means folks online can't really participate in this, because I'm looking for dialogue. An interactive environment, because that's the kind of thing that you're going to be facing, and that's the only place really where the tactical approach can be used. You can't ask a question unless you're interacting. Okay, did you want to go first? Okay, that's Calvin, right? Okay, Calvin, can you, there's a microphone here, and just if you can drop your mask, if you wouldn't mind, and just speak as clearly as you can, and Don, why don't you come up here, because sometimes they need a translator if I can't understand too clearly. So Calvin, what's on your mind? Thank you for your...
Why should there be suffering when there's a God? Why should there be suffering when there's a God?
Don, no, you have to come up here, Don. You can, no, let him keep the mic, because I'm going to be back and forth with Calvin. Sorry. But Don, come here next to me and tell me what he said.
Why should there be suffering if there is a God?
Okay, when you say suffering, what is it specifically you have in mind, Calvin? I met Calvin earlier, that's how I know his name. But notice how I'm using his name. Why? It's friendlier. Okay, so Calvin, describe what you mean by suffering. What your concern is about suffering.
Disease, famine, or anything that makes a person suffer.
Disease and suffering, or anything that makes a person suffer.
Okay, so suffering is feeling pain. Okay, because I asked you what you meant by suffering, and you just repeated the word. So how is that feeling pain? Okay. Is pain ever a good thing?
No.
No? Okay, let's just talk about that for a moment, okay? Do you know the disease called leprosy? Okay, you know what the nature of that disease is? Inability to feel pain. What happens when people don't feel pain is they get injured real easily, and they can't do anything about it. So if the car is rolling over your foot, or your hand's getting hot too close to a fire, you don't pull it away because you don't feel any pain. Does that make sense? So is pain sometimes a good thing, or is it always bad? It's the same question again. Are you trying to find a way to get out of this? Is that what?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. But you know, the question you're asking is very deep and profound. But the question is being asked somewhat in a vacuum. And so I am adding some more information for you to see that there's a lot of things going on here than just someone suffering. Okay? Someone suffering is pain. All right? Now, sometimes the pain is physical. And what happens when you feel like a really bad pain in your belly? What do, Calvin? Is that on?
I would go eat because
You what?
I would go eat because my stomach hurts.
You're going to let it go?
Go eat.
You would go eat? Well, if your pain was a hunger pain, but what if it wasn't? What was a stabbing pain down here, kind of close to your appendix? What would you do?
I'll go to the doctor.
You go to the doctor. So the pain is a signal that something's wrong and it might get worse, and so you're going to do something to alleviate the pain by alleviating the problem. Would that be a fair way of putting it? So oftentimes, pain and suffering can be an alert to something else that's more problematic that you can now fix because of the pain. Would that be a fair way of putting it? Okay. So in that regard, is that kind of pain good or bad?
I guess in a good way.
I missed it.
It's good. You're saying it's good.
Yeah, it's good. So sometimes pain and suffering can be good. If God is a good God, would it make sense for him to create a world in which pain can sometimes be used for good? Sounds of silence.
I don't know.
Yeah, you know, we can break off the role play now, but this is really just an example of how this works. And my conviction is there is suffering that seems to be without good purpose, but there is also suffering that seems to have good purpose as well. And when God makes a world, to kind of flesh out the answer, when God makes a world where human beings are mortal, then there are things that he builds into those human beings that are signals to danger. And C.S. Lewis famously says that, how does he put it? He said, God whispers in our pleasures, but he shouts in our pains. You know, something to that effect. And so sometimes it is the pain and suffering that we experience that drives us back to God where we belong. By the way, if there is no God, there is no sensibility to pain and suffering at all. Famous 20th century philosopher, British philosopher, oh, for goodness sake, Greg, said, never forget, what's his name? How can you talk about God when you're kneeling at the bed of a dying child? That's what he said. That's a very powerful challenge. It set me back on my heels a little bit. Bertrand Russell set me back on my heels a little bit. And then I heard Christian philosopher William Lane Craig say this: what is the atheist philosopher Bertrand Russell going to say when he's kneeling at the bed of a dying child? Tough luck? Too bad? That's the way it goes? Because that's all the atheist has. There is nothing but blind, meaningless suffering. You can't even put a moral quality to suffering. You can't even say it's tragic. You can just say it's painful, or I don't like it, but you can't say it's bad because there's no standard for good or bad with no God. So this is the case where we have difficult situation, pain, and suffering, but it's our worldview that makes the best sense of it. Our whole worldview is built, our story is about the problem of evil. Without the problem of evil, there would be no story. It starts in chapter 3. It doesn't get solved till 66 books later, far into our future probably. The whole story is about how we fix it. Atheism has no story about how to fix the problem of evil. They can't even make sense of the problem of evil, even though they keep arguing against God based on the problem of evil. We've got a better answer. So thank you, Calvin, for that. And be willing to endure. Yes, here, ma'am.
It's not a role play, but in the event that we actually get to a point where someone has this, the sound of silence reaction to what we say, where do you go from there? Do you stop?
Good question, but we're out of the role play now, but so I'll answer this real quickly.
Okay.
I just waited him out. Notice, I just waited. I'm letting him, in a sense, I don't know what Calvin was feeling, and he's playing along, and he's being kind to me and everything, but for the sake of the role play, I'm letting the significance of my question that he's having a hard time answering sink in and have an impact on him. And I think some of the time it was like, all right, you've made a really good point, but I don't want to acknowledge the point just yet. I'm trying to think of some way around it. And that's what's kind of going on sometimes in people's mind. So I'm just going to wait them out. Just wait them out, just like I did.
And let them speak, or do you somehow try to graciously redirect? Or
Well, I
that's
don't know.
my question.
There's nothing ingracious about asking a fair question and just waiting for the other person to answer. It is discomforting sometimes for the other person. But, all right. I mean, maybe some of you are uncomfortable with the silence. But I think the person who's most uncomfortable was Calvin. I mean, in the role play is what I'm saying. So not necessarily personally, because we're kind of role-playing this situation. But that's okay. If a person who is an objector hears a question that stalls them out in their line of thinking with their objection, and it's a legitimate thing, well, there's nothing wrong with just letting that sink in. Now, if it gets so uncomfortable, you might just say, okay, look, you just think about that for a while. Maybe we can talk about that another time, and you might close it off that way. Anybody else want to do a quick role play with me? Over here, the gentleman in the blue. But Don, you have to come back and translate, okay?
Okay.
Testing. Yeah, right.
Yeah, we'll
So,
see. Sometimes it's just my ability to pick it up, that's all. It's not your fault.
Why do you Christians believe there's no objective morality except with your God? Why couldn't atheists have objective morality?
Do you think atheists have objective morality? Is that what you're saying?
That's
that they
what I'm
do, contrary to what Christians have to say?
Yes.
Wait, sorry?
Yes.
Okay, well, I do think atheists have objective morality. That's not my concern. My concern is whether atheists can make sense of it. So answer this question for me. Are you an atheist?
Oh, yes, sir.
Okay, but do you believe in objective morality?
Huh?
You mean you believe in objective morality? Well, okay, I'm getting confused now because
So I do.
So you think there is objective
But
morality?
I've had atheist friends of mine say it's subjective across the planet.
Okay, but we're talking with you right now. So you believe in objective morality, and you're bothered because Christians say that you shouldn't have objective morality?
No, I've heard Christians say that there could be no objective reality or morality without Christianity and Christ and your God
okay.
and all this kind of
All right,
stuff.
well, let me just add a variation. And maybe some Christians have said it just exactly like that, but I think the main Christian view is there can't be an objective morality without God. Okay? It doesn't necessarily have to be the Christian God. It could be the Jewish God. It could be the Muslim God, a personal God. But without a personal God, you can't have objective morality.
You're saying without a
No,
deity?
this would be the general theistic claim. I'm just repairing the claim at the moment.
Oh.
Okay? So you're saying that bothers you? You don't think that's true?
Yeah, I disagree with that. I think there's plenty of atheists out there who think killing is wrong and,
Okay, well...
doing
just
committing
so
crimes is wrong, that kind of thing.
Gotcha. Plenty of atheists who think killing is wrong. When you say that, do you mean the atheists think that killing is objectively wrong or just wrong for them?
It's probably 50-50. Probably
Okay,
objectively wrong for some.
But in your view...
Yeah, in mine, it's objectively wrong.
Yeah, on your view, though, you do believe it's objectively wrong.
Objectively.
Okay, so that means outside of us, there is some kind of standard, a scoring system, maybe we'll call it, that identifies killing or murder, however you want to put it, as wrong. Correct? That's your view.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
okay,
much.
so here's my question. Now, where did this standard come from?
Genetics, or I don't know. I mean, DNA and atoms, maybe.
But you
Maybe
just said
the
the
magical
standard.
universe.
Right. Well, you just said the standard is outside of us, but genetics and DNA is inside of us. So which one is it? Is it out there or is it inside? Because if it's inside, that's subjective, that's relativism. So your view is that morality is outside or it's just inside based on evolution? Have you thought about this before?
No, this is I'm going to break character here. I work with a lot of just
Oh, see, you're out of character now. You gotta stay in
anti-Christians.
character.
And this is one of the arguments I've heard.
Okay.
Is what? You don't think I have morality?
Okay, good. Well, you see how this, basically, I know the problem here, all right? You can drive 35 miles an hour on the street outside here, but you're not a law-abiding citizen unless there's a law that says you ought to keep at 35 miles per hour. Do you see that? If there's no law, you can still drive that speed limit, but you're not doing something right. You're just doing something. In order to do something right or law-abiding, there's got to be a law, okay? And that's really the heart of what we're talking about here. Atheist says there's no lawgiver, so there is no law outside that we're beholden to. That's objective. There's only laws inside our DNA. But that's subjective. That's just whatever my evolution caused me to believe. Biology cannot make rape wrong. It might make me believe rape is wrong, but it can't make the action wrong in itself. That's objective morality. And see, what happens when we have these kind of conversations is people jump back and forth between objective morality and subject morality, and object and subject, and that's why I kept asking the questions. The big difference between objective and subjective, or relative, is the inside-outside distinction. And I'm just right, this next solid ground, I go into more detail about that. That's coming out. So if the morality is all on the inside, it's just a matter of personal opinion. There is no law out there, and there's no evil out there. The problem of evil disappears if the DNA is the right explanation for my mere belief in morality, okay? But we all know something's wrong with the world, okay? And this is the simplest way for me to put it. We all know that things are not the way they're supposed to be. But they can't be a way they're not supposed to be, problem of evil, unless there is a way they're supposed to be. And there can't be a way they're supposed to be without a sposer. If you don't have a lawmaker, you have no laws. If you have no laws, you have no broken laws. If you have no broken laws, you have no morality, no problem of evil. You just got stuff. But if we have a problem of evil, that means there are broken laws. That means there are laws. That means there is a lawmaker. And that's as straightforward as I can give it to you. Sir.
Okay, what if you have a society that's atheistic and their laws come from, let's just say the top.
What if you have a society that's atheistic and their laws come from where? You
Like
can't do this if you're atheistic.
From the elites of that
Oh, well, that's
society.
just other people.
So is that still
forcing their
subjective?
will. That's called totalitarianism. Look, it's either this. You either truth, and this is in, oh man, it's timely because the piece I just finished reading that's coming out March that I hope you signed up for, I go into this. One of two things are going to rule humanity, either truth or power, period. Either the truth about the way the world actually is and moral truth is going to rule, and that means our use of power is subject to the moral truth, or just power. In atheism, there is no moral truth. It does not exist in an objective sense, only subjectively. This is not controversial. There are very few atheists that are going to try to argue against this if they understand the difference. Many of them are confused the way you role-played it, confused fashion. Are we inside or outside? Make up your mind kind of thing. Okay? If there are no external laws, there are just internal desires, opinions, wishes, wants, and power. That's it. And that's why between Lenin and Stalin and Mao Zedong, more deaths resulted than the total of World War I and World War II combined. 30 million, 60 million, both world wars. Between those three men, they killed, apart from the world wars, 100 million people. That's a conservative estimate. Why? No God in their system. Only thing left is power. And that's what the atheist is faced with. That is the hard arithmetic, moral arithmetic of atheism. It doesn't mean that every atheist is going to be, a killer of millions of people. It means that atheists are allowed to. And if anybody objects to that, then my question is, what is the moral principle that is inherent to atheism that disallows genocide? And the answer is none, because there are no moral principles inherent to atheism. Okay.
They just weren't doing it right.
You know,
Just kidding.
I want to be faithful to our clock here. I am going to be here afterwards. If you want to cash some of this out on a personal basis, I'll be very happy to chat with you a little bit about it. The main thing is, and this little role play was kind of fun, and it wasn't too messy. It was for you a little bit, but I hope that offers a kind of a visual sense of how these conversations might go. And I think you could see that I spent a lot of time just getting clear on what was meant by the challenges. Now, I had a strategy in mind to go further with it, but just trying to get a clear characterization of the challenges, that was really hard because there's a lot of confusion as people think about these things. By the way, Christians get confused too, so I'm not beating up on anybody. I'm just saying this is the nature of these kinds of discussions. And that's why your tactical approach, asking a lot of questions, trying to get a lot of information, and maybe even saying, well, I can't go any further with this based on what you said because you're here and they're there and whatever. And I realize it's hard and it's confusing, but I don't know what to say based on what you've told me. It's not clear enough for me. Work on it a little bit and we'll chat about it later. I hope what you've gotten is a clear picture of the value of gardening versus focusing on harvesting. I hope you're feeling freed up. I hope I've given you some tools that will allow you to get into the shallow end of the pool and make a difference for Christ. And I hope I've given you some illustrations of how these things play out that are meaningful to you. So much more I could offer. We just all out of time. Let me take a moment and pray for you as we close. Father, I'm thankful to be here today, having spent this wonderful time with these wonderful people, to be able to invest in them something that has been given to me and I can pass on to them, Lord. I pray that you would strengthen Don and the rest of the church here, especially with this strategy that they're playing right now, Who's Your One, I think it's called, so that people can think about their one and engage productively to influence them for the kingdom. We know we need your help to do that. We can't do anything productive without you, dear Lord. I pray for your Holy Spirit to be working in the lives of this church to glorify your Son, to expand your kingdom for your Christ's sake and in his name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Yeah, round of applause. Yes. All right, just three quick things. Tomorrow, Greg will be preaching, and the message is Jesus the only way? So be sure you're here. Invite others to be a part. This is a good time to invite others to be a part. The other thing is that if you don't mind, I would love for you to have even a one-word response or just a sentence, and just email it to me, don.moore@waterbrook.org. Was it good? Hey, had a great, whether it's just describing you, glad you were here, or some particular thing that you're going to be working on, just some kind of response. You can say, man, this was terrible. I just hated being here, right? Whatever honest response is you have, I'd love to have that. And then certainly be praying about who's your one in this as we begin this. Jeff preached on this last week, campaign. And I'm just grateful for God's sovereign plan with Greg coming, kind of what we're looking at, and what I'm believing God to do in the days ahead. So God bless you. Have a good rest of the afternoon.
Thank you for joining us for our online broadcast of today's seminar with Greg Koukl. Just as we wrap up here and have the last few things that will be happening here today, let me remind you of what Pastor Don said, which is that tomorrow we will be hosting Greg in our Sunday worship services at 9:30 and 11 a.m. to answer the question, is Jesus the only way? So we invite you to join us. You can do that in person here. The 9:30 service is a mask service. The 11 a.m. service is a mask optional service. So we invite you to join us for that. Also, I want to remind you again of the resource page with Greg's ministry, Stand to Reason, at str.org. And again, go to the subscribe in the top right-hand corner, and you can sign up for future information from that ministry. We do want to thank you for joining us today and for our studio crew today that made this possible. Our live stream and audio controls have been run by Pastor John Robbins. Switcher control and cameras are under the watchful eye of Thomas Williams. Pastor Don Moore has been our live host for today, and handling our greeting and merchandise has been Cindy Dahlke. We thank you also to our Salt and Life Task Force in organizing today's event. That's been Paul Leininger, Ross Peterson, and Pastor Don Moore. I'm lead pastor of Waterbrook, Jeff Denton, thanking you for joining us today, and hope this has been a blessing to you. God bless you.